There you go. A little,
Call the meeting to order. This is the June 24th, 2014 meeting of the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, Town of Fairfield. First order of business is meeting minutes from June 10th, 2014. Does everybody get a copy of that?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Francis will be sitting for Joan tonight.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Everybody have a copy of the minutes from June 10th? Any, can I have a motion on that?
Move to approve.
Motion approved by Commissioner Jacobson.
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Calabrese. Any comment, discussion, questions, changes? Commissioner Alessi?
In regard to 1625 Mill Plain Road, it says measures that will require delivery vehicles and outside contractors assigned with responsible party. This way require all vehicles and outside contractors.
Yeah.
That's the only change I had to that.
So instead of delivery, you want all?
Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
Commissioner Jacobson, you amend your motion to adopt with that
Yes.
change? And Commissioner Calabrese?
Yep, absolutely.
Anyone else? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Item carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
one quick question. If I was sitting last time, isn't it someone else's turn?
if you were sitting last time.
Last
on
time. I think everybody was saying
Someone
that.
No.
else's turn?
Yeah, you were here to observe and participate as an alternate, and then you're here today to vote if you're needed.
Yes, you're right. She's right.
Yeah, what you had is, Francis sat for Neely and Mark sat for Canelli.
Right, in June 10th.
Right.
Right. That was right. So it should be Jackie.
Yeah, but we didn't vote on it.
Jackie's up.
I don't think it's my turn.
Yeah,
I'll be glad.
You're right.
With all candor, it would be Dolores to tell us who's up,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, I was the one who said that.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. So,
It's just based on the,
yeah.
So it's Jackie's turn to sit for Joan.
Yeah, so
Jackie's up.
your turn to vote on the minutes. So, do we need to take a new vote? No. All right. You're now voting on the minutes, and we'll take a new vote.
Now, you and I have been present at the meetings to vote on
You do.
Oh, well, no, you
We're going to make it
She was
complicated.
not.
You
it. I
abstained.
haven't compared to.
so it's fine. Vote.
You can abstain.
We had enough votes to do.
So then the vote carries, because then it was flipped back, so
6-0.
we're all set. The meeting minutes have
There you
been
go.
passed unanimously.
Yes.
Next item is
Thanks,
Color
Peter.
Road. Request of Attorney Fitzpatrick for a 90-day extension, filing a final subdivision map. First extension.
This is was approved by the commission on March 24th, and you saw in the letter there's a couple of issues with the Conservation Department in getting the final map done, but they expect to have it shortly.
And this is as a matter of right under the regulations.
Correct.
May I have a motion?
Motion approved, Mr. Chairman?
Motion approved by Commissioner Canelli. Second by Commissioner Alessi. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Item carries unanimously. Next item is 841 Old Post Road. Request of the Fairfield YMCA for a 5-year recertification for an existing day nursery use.
This is the YMCA on the Old Post Road. They've had a daycare facility there since 1985. Section 27.4.7 of our regulations limits approvals for periods of 5 years. So they were up for a 5-year recertification. We have no complaints or issues of record with this particular use.
Okay, and otherwise in compliance with regulations.
It does.
All right. Can I have a motion? Motion approved by Commissioner Alessi. Second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion on the item? No? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? The item carries unanimously. Next section is old business. This is zoning regulation amendments for application of Berwick Fairchild and Associates LLC to amend sections 10.6.13, 10.7.1, 10.9.3, 10.11, 10.12, 10.13, 10.17.3, 28.6.1, and 31.2.42 of the zoning regulations. Public hearings were on 4/8, 4/22, 6/10, and 6/17, 2014, and we have until August 21st, 2014 to decide this application. Present were Wagner, Alessi, Barrett, Calabrese, Jacobson, Kennelly, Corcoran, Holman, and Francis on various dates, and others presumably have listened to tapes, or maybe not. We'll talk about that when we get there. Mr. What?
I was, if you want an overview, the question is, I know there was an email, whether or not you wanted some time to review the record.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion, Mr. Devanchik, to table this matter, as well as item B and item C, which the chairman hasn't read yet, but they're the same application that we heard. We heard that application for 4 nights. It's only been a week since the conclusion. I'd like some more time to review the extensive record that we've received. We have till August 21st. I'm really not ready to deliberate on it tonight, so I would move that we table those 3 items, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second that.
So a motion been made to table by Commissioner Barrett and second by Commissioner Alessi. Any discussion or comment on the motion?
I agree.
So, Commissioner Jacobson?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I would like more time.
All right. I certainly do also appreciate the motion. The record was extensive. We only finished a week ago, and it's a significant volume and many issues that we need to consider, so I would support that as well. Any other discussion? Okay, so the motion is with regard to old business A, B, and C, zoning regulations, application of Berwick Fairchild and Associates, on all 3. We considered all 3 together in the public hearing as well. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion to table carries unanimously. Okay. Next item is public hearing. We need to take just a few minutes to reconfigure the room, set up the microphones, and then we'll move forward with the 2 items on for public hearing. Next item on our agenda is 50 Romanock Road. This is a public hearing for those members of the public that are present. We'll hear from the applicant first, then we'll turn to the public comment portion. Everyone will have an opportunity to say everything they want. There's no time limit. Just ask that you keep your comments germane to the application and be succinct. When you take the podium, state your name and address for the record. Once public comment period is over, then the applicant will have a chance for rebuttal. Once the applicant's rebuttal is over, then the public hearing on that item will be closed. Okay, so, Mr. Fallon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission.
Oh, they changed over there so that
Thank you. Members of the commission, ladies and gentlemen, for the record, my name is John Fallon. I'm here representing Robert and Catherine Siskowski. Kate is seated in the front row, along with our surveyor, Mr. Ted Kozlowski. This is a continued item, actually, and I don't want to be redundant, but for sake of context, I will give you a brief overview and then talk about some things that I think are relevant to your considerations tonight. As you recall from the original hearing, I also misspoke, I think, at the original hearing. I talked about construction of a new home. That was not the case here. What the Siskowskis undertook was the renovation of their existing home. And that was done and has been completed. I think many of you have been out to the site on the same footprint and without any expansion of that footprint. In any event, they were unaware of the provisions of Section 24 of the zoning regulations. when they initiated some activity that was designed to basically give the lawn a better context in the rear so that that they could use it, their children could use it safely and enjoyably. They didn't know about Section 24. Shame on them. Everybody should know about the regulations. They make no excuses. They're here. What I think is important in terms of good faith is from the moment that they were advised that there was a problem in terms of the permit, as I told you at the last hearing, they immediately stopped all activity. And for over a year, they went and they engaged Mr. Kozlowski, and for over a year, they worked with Mr. Decker at the zoning office, Scott Lemon at the town engineering department. Those two gentlemen were out at the site numerous times in order to try to rectify the situation in a way that hopefully, as I said, could be a win-win situation for everybody without excusing the violation. And they certainly paid for the violation, inadvertent or otherwise, because they spent a lot of money. I'm here, Mr. Kozlowski's here, but that's as it should be, because they didn't intend to ignore the regulations, and when it was called to their attention, they have acted completely in good faith. The other thing that I think I tried to stress at the last hearing, and I don't want to be redundant, but I'll say again, is the house of our neighbors has always been significantly lower in elevation if you've been out there. It's down the hill, so to speak. And for all the filling that we're talking about that originally went on, we didn't do anything to change that topography to create a steeper hill or create any hill. In fact, when you look at the topos, and I'll talk about those in a minute, that Mr. Kozlowski have submitted, we actually reduced the slope of the hill and improved a pre-existing situation somewhat. Now, what's happened since the last hearing? We've submitted revised plans, which I know you have. The revised plans include some additional data in terms of topos and off-site elevations that you asked us to include. The other thing that we've done, two things that I think are very important. Kate, Mrs. Stiskowski, reached out directly to her neighbors after that hearing. I was not there. I was not a lawyer's meeting. It was a meeting among neighbors who have been neighbors for a long time, and I hope it was productive. What we did to ensure that there would not be any adverse consequences to our neighbors, as shown on the revised plan, is submit a third drain for your consideration. The plans that were originally proposed, as you know, provided that there would be two drains that would be located, and I'll talk about that a little bit more extensively in a moment. And we've added a third drain between those to ensure, bootstrap, if you will, even more effectively, that there won't be any adverse impact associated with what we've done. Now, let me tell you why, at the end of the day, what we propose in this Section 24 application...
Before you go there, can you just point out where that third drain is on the
Yeah, Ted,
revised
could you
plan?
come forward and just point that out? It's right between the two other drains, but I'll ask Mr. Kozlowski to approach.
I see two. Thanks. I see this one and this one.
Okay, there's a third one here that we're proposing. These are existing, so we propose to put hay bales around them during the...
Okay, now I see them. Maybe he could take the microphone and speak to the rest, if that's okay.
Sure.
I see them now, but I do have some questions about that then.
Okay, do you want to take those questions now?
I think that's appropriate.
Mr. Kozlowski, did I just...
Has everybody identified
myself for
those?
the record?
Three
Yes, my
drains?
name's Ted Kozlowski. I'm the surveyor on the project.
Yeah, so I see a small square, and then the two drains on the right and left have a darker square around them. Are there differences in the three drains?
No, the two, the one in the middle is proposed. The two on the ends are already in. They were previously installed. And the squares that are shown around them are to signify that we propose to put hay bales around those drains to prevent silt from entering them during the removal of the material,
Okay.
during that process. And I didn't show them around the other one because it's not in yet. So-
Right, and it won't go in until after the
Right.
renovation is complete. Right.
Right. And-
Okay, so all three of those will be of the same style, same size,
Yes,
there's no difference between them.
right, as far as I know.
All right, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
So, what I said at the last hearing, and I guess I'll say by way of summary now, is, again, we regret our error. We regret the angst and difficulty it caused our neighbor. I think that was expressed very pointedly between them directly after the first meeting. But at the end of the day, we're very confident, as confirmed by the engineering department, who worked with us on this, that the grading plan that we ask you to approve under this Section 24 permit will not have any adverse impact on our abutting property owner. And this is true for a number of reasons. First of all, if you look at the original contours of the property prior to depositing the fill that created a swale directly at high velocity runoff from the Stiskowski's property to that of their neighbor. That was an existing condition for many, many decades. Our grading plan that we propose to resolve this violation alleviates that condition by removal of that swale, plus making the site drainage less intensively focused on their property line, which it was without any interruption for so many years. Secondly, as we've just heard questioning on now, we've already installed 2 new drains, and God bless, and we propose to install a third. Those 2 drains and the third that we proposed are designed to collect water flows and did not previously exist on the property. There were no drains. The grading plan, as you can see, has been designed to ensure that that site runoff will be directed to those drains. And if you notice the topo and the elevations, those drains are at a lower point than the elevation of our neighbor property. So as long as water doesn't roll uphill, those drains are going to do the job. They also have installed, as you can see on the plan, a new stone wall on the property, and that has and will continue to attenuate the kind of historic runoff that may have plagued their property. And as Ted indicated, we've made provision throughout the course of the modifications we ask you to approve for all hay bales to be installed around the drain and all proper sediment and erosion control to be taken. So at the end of the day, we didn't mean to violate the regulations. We stopped for over a year, year and a half. The Stiskowskis have spent a lot of time and money, as they should, to rectify this, but we've done that hand in hand with the engineering department, and we've done it in a positive way. And I think I will end with not my comments as their advocate, but the comments of your engineering department as contained in the memo that is part of your record from Laura Pooley, dated February 10, 2014, wherein she replies or responds, a review of the proposed plans, and that was one that didn't include the third drain, appears to address the concerns that became evident when the residents at 50 Romanok Road filled a portion of this property without obtaining proper oversight and permits. This proposal calls for the removal of a portion, 250 cubic yards, of the total fill that was recently placed on the southern portion of this property, and regrading of the rear yard in a manner that will direct the storm runoff into 2 newly created installed drains set in a swale adjacent to the stone wall along the rear property line. The installation of the drainage system will intercept runoff that previously would have flowed onto the adjacent Rayone property, thereby reducing the amount of stormwater that entered that property prior to any earth-moving activities. The yard drains are connected to the town of Fairfield storm drain that flows through the Stiskowski property by a drainage easement and is carried off-site. The measures discussed above to mitigate off-site concerns are appropriate and therefore acceptable to the apartment. So no medal for us. We broke the rules, but it was a rule we didn't know about. But because we stopped as we needed to do, and because we took a constructive approach in employing Mr. Kozlowski and working with the engineering department, the irony of this situation is it is a better situation for everyone. And what should have happened was this application should have came before you before the work was done with the same proposal, with notice to our neighbors, and with an affirmative recommendation of the engineering department. And we regret that. We regret the time you've had to spend. We regret the time that the Rayones have had to spend. But we did reach out to them. We've endeavored to act in a good faith manner, and we do believe, honestly, objectively, based upon the evidence, that at the end of the day, the situation we leave is a better situation than we found. Not only for the Stiskowski family, but also for the Rayones. so we'd be pleased to answer any questions they or you may have about this application, but we hope you will grant it. Because the option, obviously, would be the removal of all that soil, the great disruption that's going to cause, and a return to the previous status quo, which, as Ms. Pooley's email points out, would leave the Rayon proper, would leave us without the backyard that we always contemplated, and would leave the Rayons without the protection they now will have.
I think we understand the
Thank
argument. I think we have a question from Commissioner Barrett.
I just want to make sure, nothing has really changed on the plans in terms of how much fill will be left there. There was a plan
No.
to cart away about 200 cubic
There's
feet.
1,156 cubic yards there now. We would propose to remove 250 cubic yards of it. The only changes on the revised plans are the addition of the third proposed drains, and you asked us to show some spot elevations on the other side of the wall, and we've done that. Otherwise, the proposal is still the same.
Commissioner Corcoran.
I was looking at the elevations of the drains, and for example, the one on the far right is at 95.5, and on the other side of the fence, it's 96. That's a half-inch difference?
Well, it's not, it's...
6 inches.
It's 6-inch difference. 95 and a half feet as opposed to 96 feet.
I see. So the difference, when you say that the drains are lower, we're talking about 6 inches?
At that one, by reference to those two spot elevations, correct.
And that's, consider that to be enough to catch the heavy rainstorm coming down?
Mr. Kozlowski and the engineering department believe it is, based upon the way the water will be funneled and the function of those drains. And it's a better situation than would have existed in a heavy rainstorm before there were any such swales and before there were any such drains.
I have a couple of questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes. Commissioner Francis.
Is this existing silt fence to remain in place going to be on the deed?
I'm sorry, remain in place.
Is this statement, existing silt fence remain in place, going to be on the land records?
Well, the silt fence is there during the period of excavation to ensure that there'll be no sedimentation or runoff while the property is exposed. Once the work is done, the site is stabilized, the necessary bond that would have to be posted is released, the silt fencing would be removed, but not in full. But it is there as a sediment and erosion control measure during the excavation that involves the removal of the fill that will be removed.
So it's not going to remain in place,
No,
Not permanent.
it's a sediment and
what
erosion.
it says.
It's a sediment and erosion control plan to protect the drains. In other words, it's there while the site is destabilized, as is the case with any silt fence, to ensure that there is no runoff of the destabilized soil into the drains.
Commissioner Corcoran.
Where are the drains draining to?
As Ms. Pooley's email indicates, they drain into the town of Fairfield storm drain, and that flows through the Staskowski's property under a drainage easement that the town benefits from over their property. It's confined to their property.
Okay. Anyone else? So at the last hearing, there was some conversation about the stone wall and some possible disagreement over whether the wall was on, whose property the wall was on?
My understanding of that, although I wasn't involved in the time, that was originally a concern of the Rayons, and as a result of that concern, the wall was moved.
Okay.
I don't think that's an ongoing concern.
All right, so the wall as shown on these plans is in fact where it is, and it is on the Stankowski's property, and there's no dispute as to the location of the wall any longer?
Correct.
Okay. And how tall is the wall?
Approximately 2 feet. Approximately 2 feet, 2
So-
to 2.5 feet.
And the drains are on the Stankowski side of the property?
Yes.
So presumably if there was enough water, that the stone wall would intercept the water and it would pool in front and go down the drains as opposed to runoff onto the Raynaud's property?
Right, that's the idea, and that's why, with the proposed contours, we tried to create sort of a bowl in the area there, so the water can stay in there and get into the drains.
So the
I would like to point out on the Renown side of the, or pretty much right on the property line and onto the Renown side of the line, there's remains of the original stone wall.
I see that.
Pretty much flush with the ground on the Renown side of the property line.
Is that,
So, which makes it a little bit lower than the new wall. So the new wall's higher than the old.
are there remnants of the old wall still on the Raynaud's property?
Yes.
I suppose I'll...
No, not
Not the wall we built, just an old wall.
No, right, well,
a pre-existing.
pre-existing of theirs, so I get, my point is, the wall that that the
moved.
Stankowski's constructed on the Raynaud's property
It's been moved.
has been completely
And the
moved.
remnant wall was a wall that's been there historically, we had nothing to do.
And that has nothing to do with
Correct.
Right, the new wall is entirely on the Stokowski's.
So as far as,
When the concerns were raised about the location of the new wall, although I was not involved at the time, my understanding is the Siskowski's moved it. But, so there'd be no confusion, the remnants of the wall
Right.
are not the remnants of any wall we constructed.
that's what I wanted to confirm.
I'd like to point out one other thing. Before the renovations were done on the house, the downspouts all just dumped out onto the ground, and they're all piped into the drainage now. So that eliminates some of the runoff that previously existed.
Okay, thank you. All right, does anyone else? Mr. Francis? Yep.
Quick question about the
Sorry.
wall. I'm assuming it's a mortared wall and not a dry stack stone wall? I mean, it's mortared?
Mortared wall, or
Is it, I mean,
mortar?
is water going to go through it, or
It's just dry stacked.
dry stacked? Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Wait. All right. Now, I know we did hear some public comment at the last hearing, and the Raynauds did speak, but then we had an intermission, and there was some additional dialogue and some additional things that occurred in between the hearings. I would like to see if there's anyone that would like to make any further public comment,
Oh, yeah.
including the Raynauds if they...
We've submitted revised plans,
Right.
so I think any member of the public, including the Rayons, obviously should have an opportunity to speak, and I would just want to reserve an opportunity to summarize.
Certainly. Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public that wishes to be heard on this item? Yes, please. Just state your name and address for the record.
My name is Jeff Raynaud. I currently reside with my mother at 690 Winnipeg Drive. I did speak at the last meeting. I had some questions then that I would like to readdress. Hopefully we have an answer for that, and I also have a few rebuttals and things to some of their statements and comments that do not appear to be
Could you
pretty
mic?
factual.
It's hard to
Yeah.
hear.
Better for you guys?
Yes.
Firstly, I'd like to go over a couple emails that were sent to Mr. Wendt, which you had requested that I bring this time around. Would you be opposed to me reading these, just so everyone is up to speed, or would you prefer that I pass them around?
Do you have copies?
I have a single copy, which I can
Single
send
copy
to you.
of each? Are they
Whatever would be
lengthy?
quicker for you.
Fine. Go ahead. Yep. No, that's fine. I just
Okay.
didn't want to, read 3 pages of text.
No, it's pretty brief.
Yeah, go ahead.
So,
Just include the date also.
yep, absolutely. On April 22nd of 2013, my mother and I went down to the Planning and Zoning Department. We spoke with Mr. Wendt. I'd spoken with a couple other people before that. And in regards to a brief meeting that we had, he requested that I would send him an email with some of the photos and such that I had been speaking of during our in-person meeting. So I will just briefly read through this. Dear Jim, thank you for taking the time to meet with me this afternoon. Your patience and understanding in this matter is greatly appreciated. In our conversation, we discussed the property at 50 Romanock Road and the large quantity of fill that had been brought in and graded without a permit since 2007. Until now, the changes have been gradual and primarily at night when it was dark, so they went unnoticed to the untrained eye. In addition to a sizable retaining wall that has recently been constructed on the property line between 50 Romanock Road and 690 Winnipook Drive, also without a permit. Today alone, upwards of a dozen triaxles of fill were brought into the property and was yet again regraded. After my mother Valerie had initially contacted Matt Decker on March 6th of this year, that's 2013, he performed a site inspection and left a message on her answering machine stating that, quote, it was not retaining any dirt, so therefore it wasn't a retaining wall. Also, their drains are lower than our property, so any water that is coming down the hill would get caught in those drains and then piped into the easement drain, which is below the stone wall, and then out to the street, so there would not be any effect on our property. And also seeing that our property was about 2 feet higher than his, and there was an existing wall in front of it. As of writing that letter, the above statement is no longer true. Scott Lehman in the engineering department stated that he had issued a permit for the wall and that he ordered a second drain to be installed, given there were drastic changes to the grade of the property. I've attached photos, which I have for you guys as well, and they prove that the wall is in fact a retaining wall, given that the property has since been graded up to the top of the wall in most areas. I'm including one old photo from a similar angle to that of the new photos from today to allow an accurate comparison of what the property looked like prior to construction, since it remained completely unchanged until approximately 2007. If you would like any additional information, please don't hesitate to ask. I have more photos and a short time-lapse video showing changes over the course of a few hours this afternoon. Once again, I thank you for your time and look forward to speaking with you soon. I'll pass that around if you like. I do have that time-lapse video on my laptop if you prefer to see that. This is essentially the same thing. And then originally, yes, the construction was done of that wall on 690 Winnipook. The majority of that wall was on my mother's property, not on 50 Romanock Road. She had to pay to have a survey because Matt Decker insisted that we were trespassing with our stone wall, although that wasn't true. And those photographs after the survey map will show that, so I'll pass that around. And then finally, I do have the photos that were attached to that email, including what the property used to look like. Do you have any idea when that photo was taken? I know, yeah, about 30 years ago, and it was unchanged until about 2007. And then just a couple snapshots of maybe maybe a couple hours throughout the day, when it looks like Kowalski Brothers brought in several triaxles. I believe that day alone was about a dozen triaxles that came in. And again, that was on the 21st or the 22nd of April 2013. So I have a couple statements and a couple questions, if that's appropriate. First off, I guess there's a little discrepancy as to when some sort of cease and desist was issued, because they're saying that they've stopped for a year and a half. Clearly that documentation shows that we're only just about a year ago, prior to or after the date that they say they were told to stop. So I'm just wondering how they were informed and by whom and in what manner. Also, they're saying that they didn't change the slope, but they actually improved the situation. But I'm just curious as to how adding admittedly over 1,100 cubic yards of fill, how that's not going to change anything. That's quite a sizable amount, much more than you would actually need a permit for. So I just don't understand that statement saying that that wouldn't actually make a change. And the slope, in fact, was changed in opposition to what they were previously stating. And in fact, the steepest part of the slope is now closer to the property line, which is giving us a greater impact because it doesn't give any drains enough time to actually catch that water the way it did before. Also, there were two existing drains prior to any construction. There was a French drain right along the edge of the wall with gravel, and that was all collecting. And that was piped into there's a drainage easement under the new wall that they had recently constructed. That had been there before my parents had ever moved in, which was in 1980. In addition to that, there was a drain that was built with the previous homeowner and my father in cooperation with the town. There was a grate there so that if no debris would actually get caught in the drain, and it was jointly cleaned out between the neighbor and my father in case any sediment ever did get there, so the drain was functioning properly. Those were both completely removed, which led to, that was at the beginning of construction, that actually led to a neighbor coming by recently, and he could be here tonight. Unfortunately, he had to work. But he reported that the entire Beach 4, which is a couple blocks away, during all that construction, there was all silt pouring out into that lake. So it was actually affecting the lake a couple blocks away because there were no hay bales or silt fences that were ever erected up until just recently. In addition to that, I'm not sure if it was through the town or if it was someone private, but they did have to come out and suck about 3 vacuum trucks full of sediment out of that drainage easement because it was completely filled to the top and was blocking all drainage from that area of the neighborhood. And also, it was stated earlier today that the existing slope was always what it is today, although I've actually personally seen, with the assistance of some people from planning and zoning, that you guys have a GIS map on file that shows completely different. Also, in those photos, you'll see that the grade changed sizably between beginning of construction and prior to construction and today. I went through that.
Mind if we ask you?
Let me ask you a
absolutely,
question.
please.
Since the last hearing, have you gotten in touch with your neighbors?
Yes,
Mr. Fowler?
she did contact us. She stopped by the day after, just saying that we wanted to go back to being neighbors and that we did not want any type of, dispute to go on because we were friends before. I would like to think that we're going to be friends again after, and it's not this isn't something personal. It's just that my mother's affected by this and just trying to make it right.
With the fill that's there now and the 3 drains and the
Yep.
stone wall and everything that's there,
Yep.
are you feeling that you're gonna continue to have, water damage in your house? Do you feel there's gonna be an improvement here? Do you?
I don't feel there's going to be an improvement because she's still getting water in there. Now, I know that there's a proposed 3rd drain. I believe that's not been installed yet. But just a couple of weeks ago, she was, even after the last hearing, I sucked a couple gallons of water out of the basement.
So let me ask you a question. What happens if the dirt comes out and you're still getting water?
I can't completely answer that, but after construction is when the water started. Prior to any construction, there was no water. I can't speak to anything more than that.
Well, the construction of the house, you mean?
I'm sorry, the grade change.
The grade change, okay.
Grade change.
So, they built the house, they built the house and then you had water problems?
Yeah, I mean, there was an existing house. They added a garage, they added a
Right.
2nd floor to it, and then after that, just gradually, that grade just kept getting pushed back where it was.
Let me ask you a question. What do you think is better, 3 drains or no dirt, in your opinion?
I think we could find a compromise. I don't think that they need to remove 100% of it, but I also don't think that the current state that it's in is going to work either.
I don't think a compromise is being proposed to us. Huh?
Yeah, not exactly.
I mean, they're admittedly saying that there's about 1,100 yards of fill, something like that.
And the proposal
It's definitely
is-
more than that.
Right, well, okay, I
But-
mean,
but-
at least from the town's review,
Sure.
those are the numbers that we have in front of
Sure,
us.
and that's all we can really go on.
Right, so the proposal is to take 250 cubic yards out, so the net would be, something a little less than, 956. So that would be the net of their proposal.
Sure.
Okay. I had a question about these photos that you
Mhm.
submitted,
Yep.
and the stone wall.
That has been corrected since.
That's my question.
Yeah,
Right,
and I
so
know that
I'm
was up
wondering
for
why,
dispute.
is this significant any longer?
No, it was just the photos that were attached to the email, so I just wanted to provide those. That's all.
Just to be complete.
To be complete, but that has been rectified. However, it does raise a question. That wall was built by some apparent masons. It is a dry wall. When we had the survey done, Matt insisted on my mom have a survey done, if she wanted to verify that the wall had not been constructed on whoever's property. It appears that they just took the bucket that they had on the property and just pulled the wall back, so it's not really structurally sound. It was a wall, it was pulled back with the machine and was just sitting there for the most part. It was done in a day. It took several days to build the wall, it was pulled back in a couple hours, so whether or not there's a structural integrity to the wall, it's definitely in question. I don't know what type of regulations there are for building stone walls, but I figured I'd bring that up. And there was some question as to an existing stone wall. That is true. There was a small wall, just to kind of show the property line. My father had built that when I was a little kid. I couldn't tell you exactly when. When they started working on the yard and changing things around, I forgot who actually spoke to my father. And they were questioning the stone wall and its location, and although it was never over the property line, because there were existing pins in there and we were going by that, the wall was always on our property. In good faith, my father did completely dig up and remove the entire stone wall, move it 4 or 5 inches just to be courteous. He passed away while he was in the middle of reconstructing that wall, so yes, it is partly unfinished. It's something that will get done, but that was also done in an effort of good faith, just to try and be good neighbors.
So what do you think is better, the proposal or the original?
The original being,
No dirt.
I mean, that's the only situation where there wasn't water in the basement, so that's what I'm gonna have to go with. Because there were existing drains, and the slope was different, and there was no water. Now there's drains, there's about 1,100 yards more fill, and there's water. So clearly that's not working. I don't know what data anybody has that says this grade plus these drains equal an effective solution, but
Well,
it
I
just
mean,
seems like trial and error.
the record which Mr. Fallon provided, is Laura Pooley is the town engineer who apparently reviewed the plans and the information that she was able to gather. And it was her opinion in that email that the remediation that they would do and the grading together with the drains and the wall, etc., would be sufficient to, drain the water.
And
That's just to address your question
Sure,
about,
absolutely.
who says it's good enough.
Right.
There is that evidence in the record.
Absolutely. I will state that that border, that property line on the 50 Romanov side is still significantly higher than prior to construction. It is still, I would say, about 1.5 feet, 2 feet higher than it ever was. I don't know if that changes anything, but even at its lowest point, how it's been somewhat remediated, it's still higher than it used to be. I don't know that you have anything else, but I believe that about sums it up on my behalf. Okay. All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard on this item? No? Okay. Hearing none. Mr. Fallon, rebuttal.
Again, I guess I start, we apologize to the Rayons. They're here because we put the fill there when we shouldn't have done it before the hearing, okay? So nobody's going to make them the bad guys. Having said that, first of all, I don't think it's true when you look at the topographical information that there's been 1.5 foot change in the elevations here. And at the end of the day, the evidence of record, I think, supports a finding that not only has there been a good faith effort, I don't know exactly when the violation was noticed to the Stiskowskis. I think it was about 1.5 years ago. Whenever it was, that day, that moment, this poor woman, who I know from church, was terrified. She thought she was going to go to jail. And everything stopped. And that's been well over 1 year. But really, in the long run, I'm sorry that the Rayons are still concerned, but the objective factual evidence here, as confirmed by Laura Pooley, doesn't support that if you approve this plan under a Section 24 permit with the new drainage provisions and the removal of the fill we're going to remove, that there's going to be any adverse impact or exacerbating of any previous impact. It's hard for me. I was never great at physics, but I know a little bit about water. I don't understand, honestly, how with the state of that property before this activity, with it just being basically a hill swishing down, how they could not have had water problems, and now the indication is that after the work has been done, the slopes have been done, the drains have been put in, the change in grade, they are having water problems. Maybe they are having water problems. I'm not doubting their word or casting aspersions at their credibility, but I don't know where the waters are coming from, but I don't think it could be coming from our property.
This is the issue. There was no dirt, and for years they didn't have any water issues. We dumped the dirt, you dumped the dirt, and now they're getting flooded. So now we're trying to correct it with drains.
But you have to look, frankly, at the credibility of that evidence in light of the
But we also have,
unequivocal indication of your own town engineer.
but we also have to look at the fact that it was done illegally.
We've never said it differently.
I know.
Wasn't
So-
done under
Well-
darkness of night, but it was done.
Without permission.
Then the option is, you take the dirt out, there's no drains.
Well, this is
They're
why I
gonna have dry
asked,
basins.
well, this is why I asked the gentleman, well, which is better, 3 drains in the dirt or no dirt?
Okay, but at the end of the day, you owe it as a responsibility to say, ask me what is better, to ask the Rayons what is better. We've reached a different conclusion, then I think you gotta ask your town engineer what's better. And that's where I rest, okay? I don't necessarily accept the fact, with all due respect, that they never had a water problem, and now with these changes, they have a water problem. But assuming that's the fact that you have to look at because they've testified, you can assess that as credible or not. But at the end of the day, you don't have to do a who, shoulda, woulda. That's why we have a town engineer. The town engineering department has been involved on this property for a year and a half. And the end result of the town engineer's function is what we have.
But if the town engineer take into effect the human factor, October, November, the leaves fall, the drains get clogged, then it snows, then it melts, then the water runs down on clogged drains, we don't clean until spring. I mean, we have that human factor that we have to take into consideration too,
I can't speak for the town
Mr.
engineer,
Fallon.
but you can speak to the town engineer. After this hearing's closed, the case law is clear. You're entitled to take input from your town employees, like your planning director and your town engineer. Talk to her.
I will.
I hope you will, I mean, I want you to, and talk to Mr. Lehman, because they've been out there. Everybody is concerned, and I don't want to end this hearing on an adversarial situation with the Riones. It is very important to the Stiskowskis that the relationship that's been ruptured be reestablished. Mrs. Stiskowski, honestly, before tonight, thought it was, after the meeting that they had on the property after the first hearing. But at the end of the day...
That was my question. You know, because you mentioned that they got together.
Correct, I wasn't there,
And I
but
was genuinely curious as to, you know, the Raynon's response, you know, to...
I think
to
Mr. Rayon,
that.
from what Kate told me, I think Mr. Rayon probably adequately said that. I think there was
Yeah.
a lot of expression of wanting to be good neighbors, of wanting to put this behind them.
And so, right, and so the question was really from, you know, your client's perspective, did they think that the situation had been ameliorated by the addition of another drain and rebuilding some goodwill?
They
'Cause
did.
it doesn't seem that way
They
to me
did,
today.
they did, but that's not to accuse the Rayons
Right.
of any, you know, duplicity, but yes.
Of course.
They thought that they had resolved it.
Amended fences.
Okay, but that's, so at the end of the day, though, you gotta look at the facts, you gotta go to your own town engineering department. I think it would really be a shame, not only for the Stiskowskis, but for the Rayons, to have this go back to the status quo. And indeed, Mr. Rayon testified that when you asked that question, well, no, we don't want to see it all go, maybe a compromise. What does that mean? We take another 250 cubic yards out, just, you know, a little pound of flesh? What is he, because really, at the end of the day, I don't understand what it is he does want. Because you guys talked very clearly, said, well, Mr. Alessi said, what do you want? And I think what you want, what he should want, is what we have here. Not because we think it's a great idea, we're gonna have to remove 250 cubic yards of fill, but because the town engineering department believes that it is a better result than what was there before, and certainly disrupting this site, as you would have to otherwise to
Yeah.
cure this violation if you don't grant the permit.
Yeah.
But I think we beat it to that.
Commissioner Calvers.
Yes, thank you. I just need some clarification here, because I understand, I have a lot of experience with drainage, especially at my house. And I understand that water flows downhill. No matter what you have, water is going to flow downhill. Adding fill should slow that down, especially if you have drainage at the bottom. But the one thing that I heard, this is where I need the clarification, was that there was a French drain at one point at the bottom of that wall. From what I heard, that French drain no longer exists, and now that there's just the 2 drains.
I'm
Is
not
that-
aware of the French drain. I don't know if Mr. Kozlowski is. What I do know is we were never aware, nor is the town engineering department, of any drainage that would impede the sheet flow off that hill. And now what you have is a situation where the topography of the hill has been modified somewhat. Swales have been created to place the water into 2 and what will be 3 drains, plus those drains are a good, as Mr. Corbin, 6 inches to whatever it would be on the spot elevations below the Rayon's property. So I don't know about any French drains, but
Within the engineering department, would there be any documentation of drainage put in there for a French drain?
No.
To me, it's pretty simple. I mean, if there was a French drain there, and now there's not, that's where your water's coming from. Plain and simple.
we're not aware of any.
Mr. Coleman?
What would be the cost of removing the fill that's been moved in, if it were removed in its entirety?
Oh, gee, I have no idea, but I don't know. It would be extensive, but we're not making a financial argument here.
No,
What we're saying is...
It is a curiosity question, but what I wonder is if that is the situation that would make the neighbors most happy. As an intermediary situation, they could perhaps offer to split the cost of water remediation in the wet basement, just as a less expensive alternative than removing all that
I don't
dirt.
think it's fair to ask the Rayons to pay for anything associated with curing this violation. I think the question has to be whether or not they're better off now than they were before, despite the testimony you've heard. The fact of the matter is, it's not a financial argument. Certainly, it would be expensive to remove that fill. But in terms of the disruption to the site, the sedimentation, the erosion, and the loss of what your own engineering department is saying now is a far more protective drainage. This site never had a drainage system, and now it does. So, I mean, I don't know. You've got to make a decision here whether you're going to have...
Maybe not.
Huh?
It may have had drainage, it may not have.
There's no evidence to clarify that. There's no evidence that it had drainage. Nobody has seen any French drains. If there were, that's just not something that's before you. And at the end of the day, what's before you ultimately, after all the dialogue between us and the Rayons, is the town engineering department memo.
Commissioner Barrett?
Mr. Bell, I may have forgotten about this since the first hearing, but could you go through the rationale, and back to the 250 cubic yards, for the removal of the 250 cubic yards? Like, is it just being removed because they don't need it? Was it suggested by town engineering? Is it done because they thought it would provide for a better drainage solution? I mean, how did that come up? Like, why take that away?
Why take that? I let Mr. Kozlowski address it. So the question is, we have 1,156 cubic yards. We're proposing to remove 250. Where did that number come from? How did we reach that conclusion to remove that extent of fill?
Well, I think it was just trying to reduce the number to something more reasonable, and trying to affect a reshaping of the slope, rather than just having sort of a ski slope straight down to the drains, have more of an S-curve to slow the water down to the drains.
I think when the engineering department was brought out to focus on the site, there were two things in mind. How much fill was there, and how much could be gotten out, and what should be the resolution of this that would have a positive impact on the neighbor's property.
Was it the town engineer that suggested 250?
I think it was. It's to try and get at least, to get the
Well, that's a
total
question
down
for
at least
Ms.
below 1,000.
Yes.
And
We took our direction from them.
do you think it was the town engineer that suggested it? And I think it's okay. I mean, you don't have to assert positively. But that's part of the solution. So her approval recommendation is based upon the removal of that, and that has not taken place yet, right? When I go out and look at that property,
Correct.
that fill is still there.
We haven't touched
somewhere.
We haven't touched anything till we get, and that's why we have to do the sedimentation and erosion control and the silt fencing if you do approve this, because we're going to still have to remove a considerable amount of fill.
When we talk about things like a compromise, I'm wondering if that is kind of like part of something that's already been.
I think at the
Not
end of the
necessarily
day,
compromise with the neighbors, but with the engineering in terms of what is a workable solution.
Ms. Pooley and Mr. Lehman can speak for themselves, but I think that was their goal throughout this, to try to resolve it in a way that the interests of the neighbor would be protected. And I think they feel, and you can have further conversations with them, that this is a better result.
Commissioner Kennelly?
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering, it does seem to me that we sort of reached kind of a he said, she said point in this all. I mean, I hate to say, I wondered if it would be possible for Ms. Pooley to come before us, or at least respond to questions. I mean, I know it's allowed under law, but if we could somehow schedule something, because it does seem that the parties have to, I mean, there's some good questions here about some of what's going on, so.
As I understand it, you're entitled to engage and ask questions of Ms. Pooley after the hearing is closed, and you're entitled to get more information.
No, what I'm saying is would it be worthwhile in your, I mean, in your view and the leadership's view to have her appear before us? We've never had her come
Well,
before us, but I don't know if in other words, asking a question here, a question there, oftentimes it seems as though these things kind of take on life as multiple commissioners kind of ask questions. I don't know. I mean,
At this stage of the hearing, I think, you know, we're done.
Okay.
There is, you know, ample time, and if you need more time, you can let us know. And you know, if there's a question that comes up, you know, we can reach back to the applicant through staff if we need to.
The other thing, Mr. Kennelly, is that case law that I referenced doesn't limit you to written responses after the hearing is closed. You can have your engineer or your planner in here.
Yeah.
You can take oral, but that doesn't mean you have to leave the hearing open.
No, that's right. That's right. Commissioner Barrett.
Yeah, I just want to make a point. I don't know case law like we do, but I just say, I'm familiar with that, and that we can go to the town engineer or the planning and zoning department, police department, just so everybody understands, this is not something that the applicant cannot respond, once this hearing is closed, doesn't matter what Ms. Pooley, neither the applicant nor the public has any chance to respond to any answers to questions.
And that's your prerogative.
Right.
And I'm not uncomfortable with that.
Right. I would respectfully suggest that the commission has...
Should use the microphone.
It's going to go all the way over here.
Yeah, just pull the cord. There you go.
I would suggest that if you've got questions beyond what you heard this evening, the first course of action is to get them to me via email so we can all see them, and then we can get responses to those rather than asking multiple questions at multiple occasions. We can consolidate all those questions to the extent there are any, and then we can share the responses.
Sure, such that it won't be redundant. Yep. No, that's fair enough. All right.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions of the applicant? No? Hearing none? Hearing's closed.
Thank you.
Slice the baby in half, so here we are.
Next item on our agenda is zoning and subdivision regulation amendments, application of the Fairfield Forestry Committee to amend sections 2.17, 25.2.2.8, and 28.11.3 of the zoning regulations, and section 3.9 of the subdivision regulations. Anyone? Excellent.
Okay, I'm ready to go, and I know you've had a long night already. I'm Missy
Are
Byer.
you kidding me? We're just getting warmed up.
Oh my God, it's only part of this is really democracy. Actually, this has been a big education. It's been great to be in the crowd here. It's just really interesting. I'd like to just welcome the rest of the committee, the Forestry Committee, Alyssa, I think everybody knows, and Sarah Levy, and Ken Platko, who's going to come up here, I guess, and answer some questions, our tree warden, and Mary Hogue, and I think Jeff Stedman's back there. Yeah, he even made it. So we're all here to answer some questions for you. I hope you all had a chance to read the proposed amendments to the regulations. Our committee has been working with Ken Platko to look at our environment. Our trees are a huge part of what makes our town an attractive place to live, and it's also part of what solves a lot of problems with runoff and air quality and certainly quality of life. So we have been looking at the regulations, and we've noticed that there's some issues that we think can be defined and also enhanced to protect this resource that we have around us. I think I think you all got some pictures, right? In your packet? So if we take a look at some of the pictures, they kind of define some of the problems that we've noticed as we drive around town. The first is pretty obvious. It's the tree on Black Rock Turnpike that's got that really bad haircut. Just one of many bad haircuts, but there's a lot of abuse of trees, how they're being planted, how they're being cared for, and we are a little bit concerned, and we want to make sure that there's some regulations out there so that the landscapers are doing what they need to do to take care of these resources. Here's another picture of a tree that's just been hatcheted, that's in public property. Planting the right tree in the right place has always been a big issue around town, and we're very involved now with UI and looking at some of the issues with wire and trees and how we're going to be able to control the trees smashing into the wires, bringing those wires down, but we want to do it in the right way. And a big part of the problem is getting that right tree in the right place. Also, in parking lots, this is a sample of a columnar English oak, straight up. This is not going to provide any shade. Parking lots are big heat bowls. And we're very concerned that when a tree goes into a parking lot that is providing what it needs to provide, which is shade and canopy that mediates some of that blacktop effect. So this is a sample, the one at Whole Foods, of a tree that's properly planted in the right place. It's got some canopy that's going to provide for cooling off that blacktop. Planting a tree properly is a huge deal, and planting it in a place where it's going to thrive is obviously important. This is just a picture of a tree that's just like a lollipop, just stuck way down there. And if you don't plant a tree properly where the root flare is up by closer to the soil, you're going to just kill the tree in about 5 to 6 years. You won't notice it for a while. It'll be green. It'll try to survive, but then it eventually declines and dies. This sample with a little fox or dog in it is a sample of the confusion that we see all the time with right-of-ways and people planting trees in the right-of-ways, sometimes that are inappropriate. This is a sample of, I think there were 7 maples that were planted right underneath the wires. And so, of course, for about 3 years, they're going to look fine, and then all of a sudden they're embedded in the wires, and it becomes a big issue. So, once again, planting the right tree in the right place, and also taking the permits and going through the permitting process so that they're approaching that properly is very important. Let's see, did I forget anything?
Great question.
Yep. We have a question over here.
You have a question?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Regarding 28.11.3, shade trees.
28.
0.11.3.
Yeah.
Shade trees, defined as a single-trunk deciduous trees, which by virtue of their natural shape provide at maturity a minimum shade canopy of 30 feet in diameter. That's a big tree, no?
Completely. Yeah, 30 feet completely. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
okay, so that's for parking lots with more than 20 parking spaces, correct?
Yeah.
CVS parking lot, Stop and Shop, stuff like that. What's the diameter of that trunk?
The diameter, can you put the number?
Yeah, 30-foot, what you described is really a small tree. That's an ornamental tree that we consider as a roadside tree planting. A large growing tree would be 60, 70 feet tall, probably 60, 70 feet wide too.
But you're talking 15 feet from the diameter of the...
Yeah, from the trunk of the tree.
From the trunk of the tree?
Yeah, 35 feet out, 30 feet out from this trunk for a large growing tree. For a small growing tree, what you're describing, and for an ornamental is...
Yeah, right, that would be 60 feet.
That would be, so,
Yeah.
the regulations,
15 feet from the trunk all the way around. 30-foot diameter.
that is a small tree. Right, so, but just to be clear, the 30-foot diameter would be from the trunk, 15 feet one way and 15 feet the other way. That's correct. Right, and so in that case, generally speaking, how big is the trunk on a tree that has about a 30-foot shade?
12 to 18 inches.
12 to 18 inches?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it also needs the root space to grow in that area.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Right, so
yes.
how is that gonna work in a parking lot?
Pardon?
How is that gonna work in a parking lot?
Oh, it does. Well, if you could take a look, there's lots of different designs that you can use, but if you have these channels for
Right, I
there's
saw that
also-
picture, but is that a 30-foot diameter tree?
Oh, no, but this is a tree that's just been put in.
Yeah.
Right, I know.
Yeah, so, we're talking at maturity.
Right.
What would be an example,
maturity?
what would be an example in town of a shade tree in a parking lot 30 feet in diameter?
Okay, well, take a look at, if you go, to the Stop and Shop in Westport, and if you've ever noticed when you drive down that road that you don't really notice the big Stop and Shop,
Right.
it's one of the more effective planting sites. The trees are like maples, and I think there's an oak or two in there, but there's no, it's no oaks, it's maples, I think, but they're planted in sizable, spaces that are raised up from the ground and have enough soil in there so that the tree can thrive, and they also just have a tremendous effect on that parking lot in terms of shade and,
Also,
conditioning.
a town in an area is Black Rock Turnpike. If you're going up that road, trees are starting now to take full shape and desired canopy that we're looking for, and it's starting to really meld the commercial side of it with the natural side of it, and I think that's what we're looking for.
Are there any areas on Black Rock Turnpike that, meet that standard, the 30-foot?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, I'm looking along the roadways from Katona Drive up to probably Brookside that are starting to fill in now and starting to kind of hide that strip malling that we had in the past.
Commissioner Barrett?
Yes, I'm very interested in shade trees in parking lots, because I always look for them, and I have to say, in our town, I very rarely find anything that would provide the shade in a parking lot for cars. So, my question is, our current regs just talk about shade trees shall be provided in parking lots with 20 or more parking spaces. That means they have to provide them, and it's, whatever, it's one for every 10 spaces. You've actually defined it as single trunk deciduous trees, and by virtue of it, will provide a maturity. My question is going to be, because again, we're commissioners, we're going to get applicants in, we're going to have to conform. How is that going to work? I don't know trees like you do. Are particular trees defined as what their minimum shape canopy would be, so we know when an applicant comes in and they said, this is our planting plan? I mean, I would think that we would want that reviewed with the tree warden to make sure that what the kind of trees they want to plant do meet that requirement.
Research over the last 20, 30 years now has really shown what parking lots, trees can do for parking lots and providing minimal cooling effects, and it's amazing what's out there.
But what you're saying is, how are you going to know?
How are we going to know? Right, we're not,
And
you said
that's where the tree warden does get involved.
Okay.
I think
And the
that's
spacing
extremely-
aspects of the trees through the parking lot.
So,
So you're incorporating the trees into a parking lot or scenario.
right, and in a lot of cases, we review landscaping plans and counting them up and the trees, and we use whatever expertise. I'm just saying, to have such specific regulations, we're going to need, I believe, the expertise to do.
The idea, it says shall be subject, so you're saying essentially here is that shall be subject to the approval and oversight of the Town of Fairfield Department of Public Works Town Tree Warden. So essentially what will go on is just as we aren't necessarily expert on water courses, but we learn that there are reports filed, WPCA and things like that, what would happen under this regulation down below here in 2811.3 is that you, Ken Placco, would see when a plan would go through, and you would know whether we were getting the right kind of tree or that. Is that the idea? We would have that confidence that if they come to us, if Mr. Fallon or someone comes over and say, this has gone before the tree warden, he has said our trees will get to 30 feet around, and this will be taken care of. And we'll be able to nod and know that's the case. Is that what will happen under the bottom part of 2811.3? Is that correct?
I heard that was pushed to my
Is
ear.
that correct, what will happen
But
under what's down
The
here
tree
below?
warden will do it, not Ken Placco.
I know, but I'm just saying, but the idea is the warden's office will do it. The warden's office will do it. That's the difference.
I
Very good.
Yeah, of course, I read that, I just wanted
And
to
then
make sure
Commissioner
that you're aware
Jacobs.
that we will need a review, and it may not be, he said code review, we don't always have the landscaping plan, and sometimes we're asking for things later, we're asking amendments, so we're gonna need, to make this work, we're gonna need, support
Yeah.
from Public
As-
Works and the tree ward.
As a tree warden, though, my authority only lies within public grounds and public right-of-ways. As an advisory, I do go to code meetings, I do make my comments out there to let them know that, you know, what I think, so.
Okay. Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you. Actually, that was my question, at a code meeting, that you would, for a developer, if you wanted certain trees, you would list them. So that was basically my question. I also want to wish you a happy retirement.
Thank you. I still got
Commissioner
another
Calabrese.
One thing we forgot to mention, you should have all gotten a copy of the forestry management plan, and Jeff Stedman has been so, I don't know where he is. So Jeff has really helped us put this together, but I hope you have a chance to take a look at it. We really feel that Fairfield's urban forest is such an important resource to be managed, and we cannot ignore it. We can't just let it happen. We have to really be careful with every step of the way here with our trees.
Commissioner Calabrese.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple simple questions, I'm sure, for you in regards to some of the pictures that are in here. We were talking shade trees, and you know, a good one that you guys have here is the Whole Foods Market. For a tree this size, how long does it take for it to grow to about the size of the ones you're talking about in Westport?
You're talking 20, 30 years.
Right, 30 years down the road.
So do we increase the size of these trees, or do we keep what we're
Exactly.
planning now?
That's exactly what my question would be. Second question I have in regards to the pictures. Last one you have in here, on the Congress Street pictures from the 5 maples that are there that are planted in the right-of-way. What is the current regulation for the tree warden? Couldn't you tell them to remove these now?
Well, they did.
They did.
He did.
I'm sorry.
I wouldn't know by this, I mean, yeah, no problem. I wouldn't know that because the picture just says that they were planted without permission
Oh,
from
so
the
that
tree warden.
was an
so-
issue, and they actually had to remove them and plant a different tree. That's a sizable investment there.
Thank you.
Well, hold on. The town removed them and replanted?
No, the homeowner.
Require the homeowner
Right.
who planted them
Yeah.
to remove them and plant something
More appropriate.
for the area.
Yeah, okay. Good. Commissioner Coleman.
That's where my authority.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
I had one more.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were. No, please go ahead.
With the UI pruning, that's I don't know if it's already started, but I know there's been big discussions with that going on right now. I would assume majority of the trees that UI will be pruning would fall into the town right of way. Do you have oversight on the way they prune those trees, or do they just go in and chop away?
We have control within the town right away. As from what I'm hearing from other towns, 75% are private trees that they're going to be requesting to have removed. The other 25% are town, but, you know, what percentage of those are healthy, structurally sound trees that we might object to, and that's where we're going to have to work out the balance. But we're talking about 20,000 trees here.
Yeah.
In the town right away, and that's a really significant impact on the health and environment of the town, as well as the state of Connecticut.
Right, right.
So,
Okay.
Commissioner Coleman.
2 quick questions. First, when you say town of right-of-way, does that mean like parking lawns? Is that town-owned land, the trees along parking lawns, street?
I hate to say it, it's generally 10 feet off the paved surface of the road, but it varies from road to road to road.
So if one has a dead tree on the parking lot, is it the homeowner's responsibility to remove it, or the town's responsibility to remove
Without
it?
having it looked at and surveyed, I can't make that determination.
Okay. Second question is, on 25.2.2.8, it talks about the need for a landscape plan. I don't have a context in which to put this. I should have looked up the regs, but is this within the town right-of-way, or is this any construction project, and is this not inserting the town into a homeowner's prerogative about what they plant and how?
From what I've been seeing in the projects that I've been going around and visiting, is that developers will come in and do a plan, whether it's a single house or a subdivision, and not incorporate the idea that a town tree is part of the infrastructure, such as a telephone pole, a utility pole, or a fire hydrant, or something like that, which is what they're required to do.
So,
And
Mr. Wendt would like to add something here.
Yeah, I'm not loving that.
Jim Wendt, as I understand your question, none of these regulations are going to apply to private residential property.
Where do they apply?
Section 25 is the special permit section, is requiring that the landscaping plan as set forth in this proposal would apply to commercial developments, not to
Thank you.
your individual single-family house.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Corcoran.
I have a couple questions. Why are the trees limited to deciduous? I mean, aren't there like white pines and things that could also fit this bill?
Yeah, just number one is they're a soft wood, and they have a tendency with ice and snowstorms to break down a lot quicker than deciduous trees.
But they stay green all winter.
That's true, but they do break down. They are subject to, prone for failure.
And the next question, your first photo here is of the trees near Chips up there. Is there anything in these regulations that would stop someone from pruning a tree like this?
There's standards of care, and those ANSI standards address some of those pruning issues, and also,
Where are those standards?
The ANSI standard, the American Institute of Natural Standards for pruning, or for tree work, is a national organization that puts these regulations out there. It's an industry standard that everyone follows.
So, but
What
obviously
they're
not.
doing there is what they call pollarding. But I think what you, as a commission, have looked for is for shade trees, not for doing a type of pruning effort that was used for back in Italy when they used the stems and for putting down for bedding material for animals.
Well, what I'm getting at though is that, I mean, you've shown us poor pruning techniques, but I don't see this reflected anywhere in the new regulation. I mean, what's the relationship here?
under the ANSI standards.
Well, the 28.11.3
Yeah.
does require that the trees be selected, planted, and maintained according to
Got it.
the
That's what I was
standards
asking.
set
Thank
forth
you.
in the ANSI.
Another question. The Whole Foods tree that we have the picture of, does this tree meet the new standards in here? Is this what would be planted?
This is the type of tree that we recommended as a shade tree that would provide cover, reduce heat.
But I meant in terms of the diameter of its,
Yes,
trunk,
I
its,
believe so. They have the right scenario for amount of planting area for root.
Well, I think the old standard was 1.5 inches and now it's 2.5 inches.
Well, no, what we're looking at was basically correcting the old regulations that you had here, and kind of misnomer of what was a caliper versus the diameter of a tree. When you're planting a sapling tree, they look at caliber of tree, not diameter of tree. So a caliber of a tree is 6 inches above grade, and that's how they measure it. You're measuring 2.5 inches, 6 inches above grade versus 4.5 inches, or 4.5 feet above the height of the ground, where you would get that taper coming up, and then you would get a reduced height in it, or a reduced measurement in it.
Can I say
I think-
something?
I'm sorry.
It just changes the way it's measured?
Yeah,
not
it's
changing the
more
size?
dealing with the industry standards of how it's measured versus how what you're looking at it was in the past versus what is the industry standard right now.
Also, the bigger tree you plant, it's not always the better tree that you plant, even though the investment is also more. But they're finding through research that if you plant those larger trees that have been balled up in nurseries for long, long periods of time, a lot of times, once you put them in the environment, they just don't grow as fast as the tree that's younger, smaller, and has an opportunity to set its own roots. So it's not always beneficial to plant that bigger, thicker, fatter tree. So, well, it's not.
So,
Just
sorry.
a question about...
Just give me one second. So, the regulations then would require new applications to provide the landscaping plan, which would meet the regulation in terms of maturity, having a canopy of 30 feet. Of course, they're going to be planted as new young trees, and the requirement then that they be maintained according to ANSI will promote that canopy at maturity of 30 feet. Is it your vision that if a landowner is not maintaining trees and according to ANSI, then it will be a zoning enforcement issue for the remedy?
You mean like in a parking lot? Or
Yeah.
I think of Bob's.
So I'm talking process.
should be.
Okay, and because the regulations now will require there to be the plan submitted in accordance with these standards, that according to these standards, the landowner is going to have to maintain the plantings in accordance with the ANSI standards. The purpose of that is to ensure that the tree does mature to the appropriate canopy and height, etc. But to Commissioner Corcoran's point, if a landowner doesn't maintain according to the ANSI forestry standards, is it your proposition then that it will be a zoning enforcement issue? So we're going to see a landowner out there that chops off the top of the tree, okay, like in the pictures that you've submitted, and somebody's going to come down to TPZ now and say, hey, the folks over at Bob's chopped off the top of the tree, we need to have a zoning enforcement officer go out for violation of 28.11.3? Is that how it's going to work?
I think it makes sense. I mean, and I only think it makes sense because you're looking at the future of that space and the effect that tree would have on that environment, right?
Okay.
That strip mall effect that you're trying to
And that's okay.
remediate.
And
I think,
I'm asking...
yeah, and I think what we wanted to keep track of is that, yes, it takes trees a long time to grow, and that investment that you make, providing the tree the right pruning techniques and the right environment there is going
Right.
to pay off in the long run, and that's
Okay.
going to affect what it looks
All right.
like. And
So, would it be appropriate for the TPZ to delegate the authority for enforcement of 28.11.3 maintenance to the tree warden?
maintenance of all the parking lot trees,
To delegate the enforcement
the enforcement of it.
of the maintenance?
Right now, the state statutes only give the tree warden the authority to regulate trees within public grounds and public right-of-ways.
Understood,
Not
but we as
within
a
private property.
commission and the office could delegate authority to another town office, could we not?
Joe Devancha, planning director. I don't think you have to delegate the authority. We could keep the authority. In a sense, what you're saying is true. If it's a regulation, in our zoning regulations, we are required to enforce it. What the process is, and we've done this in the past with existing landscaping plans. We've had issues over time that there was let's say a planting screening area that was taken down or moved or destroyed. We've actually had people check our landscaping plans on file and made property owners reconstruct the landscaping screening to that requirement. So I would assume the process would be the same here, that if in fact there was let's say the shade tree requirements for parking lots were completed, the process is similar to what we use now. We would get a landscaping plan, we would refer it to Ken, he'd make his comments, they would make whatever changes.
Yeah, I'm talking 10 years, right, into the process, and
Well,
they're not pruning the
well, I'm
tree
saying,
appropriately,
yeah,
you know,
but just,
something like that.
just to
It's
get to
long-term.
that, the original landscape plan would be reviewed by Ken, he would make his recommendations, they would be changed, that would be submitted to you, essentially saying, yes, that was reviewed by, the tree warden, this landscape plan meets that. Now, over time, if, like the example I just mentioned to you, somehow those trees died,
Yes.
we would have a plan on site that was approved by this commission, that we could in fact go ahead and say, you have to replant these trees as per these requirements. The replanting would be, again, reviewed by the, so you're not delegating anything to them. What we would do, as part of our enforcement process, would utilize the tree warden's office to confirm that in fact the enforcement of that and the reconstruction or replacement, the tree was done properly.
Excellent.
And I don't see that to be a problem.
Okay, good.
We agree, finally.
And
Not gonna be here.
so again, just in terms of process, do we instruct applicants now that they have to, about anything with regard to maintenance of the landscaping plan? And I just don't know the answer.
It's like I mentioned to you, we have had examples in the past
Yeah.
where landscaping screening area, it's more than screening than the shade tree situations, like a screening of a property, a line or whatever. We've had examples where, you know, we've had people come to say, look, I don't think that's correct, or it's been damaged, and we've pulled out the old landscaping plans and we required them to replace it. So, you know, the process is not impossible.
Okay.
Yeah, you also, within shade treeing, that you have done that by identifying spots where trees can be planted and should be maintained.
Right, good. Commissioner Barrett.
Yes. Ms. Byer, I want to thank you and the Forestry Committee, and I'd say I really appreciate the fact that we have a Fairfield Forestry Committee. It's an outstanding resource in our town and all the people that work on it. And I recall you came and presented proposed amendments at the time, as you stated in your letter, sometime early last year. But that was part of a larger planning meeting. We had a lot of topics that were kicking around that night. So I just wondered, just my interest is, what were the additional changes and modifications that Mr. Wendt recommended? Like, what were some of the final touches that you made on this plan? That just give me some insight into what, you know, I don't know, what you were thinking, what some of the final modifications were.
The final, from where we started last year? Or?
Yeah, from March of 2013, when you came and presented this, I realized I could go present the two plans, but I was hoping that maybe you recall what they were.
I think,
since you referred to them in your letter.
most of what we did was just work on the text, and
Okay.
try to make it more clear and defined.
Right.
I mean, we've been working on this text forever, it seems, and it hasn't really changed that much. Just tried to be more.
I've tried. I don't believe there were any, Jeff Stedman, and I'm the consultant to the Forestry Committee. I don't believe there were any substantive changes made from the first draft. The comments Jim had, and he can speak for himself, I think had to do with the proper locations in the document to insert the recommendations that we were thinking about.
Okay.
But I don't believe there were any substantive changes at all.
That's what I thought, because this sounds a lot like what I recall, but I was just wondering what the changes were. So they were really just how to form, because again, words are very important to us. When we thought, it's simple now, they're concepts, but applicants will come to us, and they'll have these as the regulations, and if they're clear, just like we have with our architectural standards, they work well. They just come in and they say, okay, this, you want 10, we'll give you 10. You want this is the kind of tree you want. And if they're not clear, it just leaves us in a tough position of like what to approve, what not to approve. So it was mainly in terms of making them the type of language that would, be properly codified then to our regulations. Is that my understanding?
I believe so. Jim, that's your recollection?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good. Mr. Coleman.
I'm not even sure how to best ask this question. Reading the section on shade trees, it says that there will be one tree for every 10 parking spaces, which requires then that parking lots have a strip, a green grassy strip on which trees are planted. Do we currently, you're saying yes.
No, well, I'm sorry.
I can speak. Our regulations currently require
one tree for every 10 spaces. That's been in the regs for a while. What this amendment proposes to do is clarify, as Ken mentioned earlier, the standard for measuring that and more specifically the type of tree it should be.
And do we then grandfather developments that don't have that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is not,
I was going to say,
you can't apply this retroactively.
I was going to say, most of the parking lots I've seen in the town don't have the green.
Right, most, I would agree, most
Okay.
most parking lots now do not comply with this, but this is not a retroactive amendment. We can't.
So going forward,
We
they
can't
would
go
be
back to
required.
Coles, for example, and say, you owe us 200 trees.
Okay.
It's just on a going forward basis.
But going forward, we're going,
Yes.
okay. So going forward, it's going to be harder to get the required number of parking spaces for a large building.
No,
because
and
of this.
we've made other amendments. I mean, using the Whole Foods as an example is probably the best example of a recent development that employs better techniques. Developers and landscape designers and engineers are more attuned to low-impact development techniques that we now have adopted into our regulations. And in some cases, on a large-scale project like a Whole Foods, we actually allow a certain amount of reduction of parking if they are creating enough of these green areas that we're calling for in the regulations. We have a variety of ways to put trees in a parking lot. You don't need to be a grass strip. They can be around the perimeter. They don't have to be in the middle. That's something you have discretion over on how they're actually deployed. But there's all variety of manners in which that can be accomplished.
Thank you, Jim. One other question is, does this take away from the developers the opportunity to put in ornamental trees that perhaps don't have a shade purpose? I'm thinking Bradford pears or, things that are more columnar but pretty.
Spoke a bad word there with Bradford pears.
Yeah.
No, we are looking for the right tree in the right place. And depending on the situation would then dictate of what we're going to recommend.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Thanks very much. I just want to make sure, first up, I want to echo Commissioner Barrett's thanks. I think what you did was terrific, and I heard you talking about how long it takes to get language passed. I know I'm working on another committee, how long that takes, so thank you so much, and all the members of the committee, and you, Mr. Placco, and consultant. But my question is, would it be a fair assessment broadly, because we've drilled down here a little bit about what's being asked, is that ultimately, what you're asking us to do is to adopt standards that will encourage, or I should say, will discourage the urban island effect in parking lots in Fairfield as these are developed in the future. That broadly, the effort is to grow the public tree canopy where possible with incentives like that are written in here. That's essentially the broad goal. And then it seems, in terms of enforcement, well, you've got something here akin to outdoor dining, where we embrace the concept of outdoor dining because it adds to street life. At the same time, we have to be vigilant to see that those entities that provide outdoor dining, for example, stay within our regulations in order that it remains a public good and that it's properly operated. So those two core concepts seem to be what you're looking for: a reduction in urban island effect, a growth of that canopy over time with the changes in measurement, and then an appropriate methodology for us to follow up and make sure that this is maintained. Is that kind of broadly what you'd like us to do?
Every case is different.
Right,
You have to look at each one separately and then
Right.
analyze it and then put your recommendations into it.
But as a broad matter, the goal is to try to hopefully grow the not just the number of trees, but the kinds of trees that grow that
fit the
canopy.
situation, right,
okay.
exactly.
In the right of way.
Or on private.
We'll get to the we actually haven't gotten to the public comment portion of the hearing
Oh, there's
yet.
4?
But we will.
We've just been so engaged. It is great, and I echo the comments about thanks for all the hard work and everything. It's been a long time, obviously, and we spent time in our own planning sessions on some of this. Just for the record, did you also look at other jurisdictions and the regulations in other municipalities, whether in Connecticut or elsewhere in the United States, to, sort of adopt some
Yeah, we
best
look
practices kind of thing?
around the country,
Uh-huh.
from Florida to Fort Collins to, you named it, we looked at them and see what is out there. And there's a lot of different stuff. And it's a health-warming situation where you see these towns, cities that are really promoting this stuff and really pushing for it because they realize that it really promotes the benefits of the commercial and the residential sides of the community and providing the environment that they're looking for.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Francis?
One question. Thank you to the committee for all the work. It was really exciting to read this. And a question, would this become part of our budget at all, where on page 2.5 we have to enforce this, obtaining funds for the town operating budget? Would that be under us at all? Or is it totally still the tree warden's budget, DPW?
For which section?
2.5 on page 2.5, or do they?
Yeah, 25.
In the book?
Near the,
If I could speak to that again, it's Jeff Stedman. I think you're referring to the draft forestry management plan. Yes, and that's not something that we're bringing before you tonight for any sort of endorsement. What you have tonight is simply the changes to the zoning regulations. The draft forestry management plan, I can talk a little bit about that if you wanted to take some time, but that wasn't the topic for the discussion tonight.
Yeah,
Certainly.
Right. It's, it doesn't have real page numbers.
it doesn't have page numbers, really.
No. So just for clarification, it is the application
Yeah, I
for
get
the
you.
amendments that were submitted under this,
Okay.
which
So
are
it's not a
being
budget
proposed.
issue for us yet.
No.
Sorry to confuse you. We put that in background information to show you where we're going and what we're working on.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Very well. Is there any member of the public that wishes to be heard on this item?
Anybody but you.
You have to, sorry, please, let her come first. I understand, just take the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Janine Alianello, I live at 472 Mill Hill Drive, and I love learning about all this, so thank you for bringing this today. I want to see if they can include their program to any parking lot that would be over, including a residential area. If it was going to be 116 parking spots, have coverage for areas like that along a highway. So you're going to start removing trees. It's kind of contradictory. Clearing land to build big parking lots. Maybe put some required residential if you're going to have big parking lots for housing developments. Could this be included in that kind of conditions? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to be heard? Look like you've lost some weight.
No. I will tell you, it's much better on that side than this.
Name and address.
Richard Jacobs. And technically, you do not have to give an address, but I will. And I have said that many times.
Fairfield, Connecticut.
Fairfield, Connecticut. It is public comment. So, my interest is mostly in the invasive species. You know, most of you would know that. I don't understand why anyone would want to add invasive species into the environment and then, 2 years later, call the Boy Scouts to come and rip it all out, as we are called many times all over town to rip out invasive species. So I'm hoping that you will, also when you look at this, the way this is written, new invasive species people are being creative and bringing stuff in all the time. And the way this is written, it's tied to the state list. So you're not going to have to do any maintenance on this. Whereas if we just listed some invasive species, every time there was something new, there'd have to be a new public hearing to add the new piece onto it. This is tied to the state list. The state will keep a list that updates regularly, and it will automatically become part of the regulation that way. So I think it was done really well. I'm here just in support of this, and I hope that in the next meeting that you will be passing it. I also, off subject, want to thank the tree warden, Ken Plackle, for all his years of service. So I just wanted to do that publicly.
Thank you. Any other member, please?
Like Richard, I'm not ashamed of where I live. My name's Joe File. I live at 76 Penfield Road. And like Richard, my hobby horse is non-native and especially invasive plants. So if I may, I'd like to ride that hobby horse just for a couple of moments tonight. And thank you all for having this hearing. Now, I'm obviously here to support the passage of the proposed amendments, and I think they're well written and well done and well thought out. Now, invasive plants are basically non-native plants that grow out of control and ultimately destroy habitats and diversity in our ecosystems. Not all non-native plants are invasive, but all invasives are non-natives. The reason that native plants can't become invasive is that they've evolved here with the insects and animals that control their growth, and that's not the case with invasive species, or even in fact non-native species. I mean, I happen to be I've run my garden on an entirely native plant basis. I think all non-natives are a problem because they can become invasive if they can escape and there are no natural enemies for them. Most people have heard about the various horror stories about plants taking over our habitats. Kudzu, burning bush, Phragmites, Norway maple in terms of our plants. I'm glad to see that we'll be controlling what people are planting. But most people don't know that the adverse effects that invasives cover more than are far more extensive than merely killing off the native plants. Invasive plants change the entire ecology of the regions that they infest. The primary problem with non-natives is quite simply that they've not evolved here and therefore have not developed the natural enemies that our native plants have. The primary controls that prevent our plants from growing out of hand are frankly the insects, and in particular the herbivorous insects that eat the plants. However, the vast majority of our herbivorous insects cannot, because they have not evolved to do so, they cannot eat the native plants, and most especially the invasive species of native plants. 90% of all of our herbivorous U.S. insects are specialists, and that means that they live on, they eat only one, and sometimes maybe only a few different varieties of our native plants. So that's 90% of our insects that control plants in this country cannot eat the plants that we bring in here. Now there are the remaining 10% are sort of generalists, and they can eat a variety of plants, and those are the guys that climb on the native plants that arrive here that do not become invasive. But they don't eat all of them, and the ones that they can't eat become totally invasive. So the net result is that these invasives have no enemies. At least no insect enemies. They grow out of control, and as they do so, they take over the territory that was previously controlled by our native plants, which are the food source for these insects. So the growth of the invasives destroy the insects, which then make it more available for the invasives to grow farther, and you end up in this incredible spiral where you have Kudzos and their ilk taking over entire neighborhoods. But the negative effects of these plants affect not only just the plants, but also, not only the plants and the insects, but also the other species that share the environment with them. In particular, birds. 95% of all bird nestlings eat only insects. And that's the case of even those birds which, when they are adults, are seed eaters. The only way they can get the protein they need to grow is by eating insects, and if these invasive species are wiping out the insect populations in our forests, there are not sufficient insects to feed as many baby birds as are around there, and our bird population is in fact declining. And there's a bunch of studies which show that forests that have and fields that have a high proportion of invasive plants have vastly lower concentrations of insects, of birds, and the other smaller, lower level mammals and reptiles and amphibians that eat the insects. So these things are a real problem to our environment. The state knows that, and the state has now, back in the early part of this decade, has enacted legislation which created an invasive plants council. They've now enacted the statute which prohibits the use of certain invasives in the state. And I am glad to see that we are now proposing doing the same here in at least the limited circumstances. All the help we can get is better than none, and I think it's a great program, and I encourage you all to vote for it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to be heard on this item? Yes.
Kathy Braun, 245 Sunny Ridge Avenue. I'll be very brief. Miley Bull came and spoke to a group that I'm a member of, Fairfielders Protecting Land and Neighborhoods, known as Fair Plan or Plan. And he explained this whole thing about the invasive species that the gentleman before me mentioned. And also there's, what he didn't mention, but I read recently in the Audubon magazine, there's something called aerial plankton, which is all the bugs up there, and that's what the birds need. And anything that decimates the bug population helps contribute to the decline in songbirds. And it's just a domino effect. So anyway, I support the tree regulation that's been put forth to you, and I also wholly support anything this commission can do to prevent invasives. And I would add bamboo to that list as well. Thank you.
Presume bamboo is on the state list.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to be heard on this item? You'll have rebuttal.
No, but I think that it is important.
You will have rebuttal.
I just think that
You will have rebuttal. Any other member of the public wish to be heard on this item? No? Excellent. You now can have rebuttal.
I think it is very important for the panel to realize that the invasive problem is a real problem because people have right-of-ways. They don't even know that it's not their right to plant plants in there, and then they go and get those flaming bushes and they plant a whole strip of them there, and it becomes an issue in the wetlands because it starts to infiltrate the soils and kills a lot of the other trees. So it is a big issue, and a lot of this has to do with education. People don't know that it's not a great idea to plant bamboo. They certainly don't know about flaming bush, and so it really is our job to understand the critical issues here that need to be dealt with, and we have to be very aggressive about regulating that for sure.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions for the, excellent. All right, hearing none, I'll close the hearing. And I'll adjourn our meeting. Thank you.